I love the people in the back. Thank you guys for everything you do. I'm going to throw you a curveball. We're going to change up the order of things a little bit from the last two services. So we're going to open up our Bibles right away. We're going to look at our passage this morning that we're going to talk about. And I love this passage, and it's one of those passages that as you read it, when you take it at surface level, like it seems like a pretty straightforward thing, but as we dive in today, hopefully we'll see that there's a lot more kind of going on here. So we're going to be in Genesis 32. Genesis chapter 32. We're going to start with verse 22, and we're going to read the story of Jacob here. Then we're going to talk about it a little bit. During the night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 servant wives, his 11 sons, and crossed the Jabbok River with them. After taking them to the other side, he sent over all his possessions. This left Jacob all alone in the camp, and a man came and wrestled with him until the dawn began to break. When the man saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of its socket. Then the man said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." "What is your name?" the man asked. He replied, "Jacob." "Your name will no longer be Jacob," the man told him. "From now on, you will be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have won." "Please tell me your name," Jacob said. "Why do you want to know my name?" the man replied. Then he blessed Jacob there. My wife loves to label things. We bought an expensive labeler. Probably more than we need to spend on a labeler. But she really likes to label things. We got this labeler, and right away she started walking around the house and seeing all these things that need to be labeled. Basically everything that was in our house. And she'd walk up and she'd type in a label, and she'd hit print, and it'd kind of spit it out, and then you hit a little button and it cuts it. She'd take it, she'd put the label on there. She just kept going around the house and doing this. I mean, I remember I came home and it's like everything was labeled. You walk in and there was a sign with everything on. I swear our kids' foreheads had their names labeled across them. And they're just like, everything in the house is labeled. And it was great because I love knowing what something is. You guys with me on that? Like, I like to be able to look at something and just kind of dismiss it right away and know exactly what it is, be able to categorize it and put it in that area, and then just kind of forget about it and walk away and leave that there, and it's labeled, and I know what it is, and everything in the world is good and makes sense, right? And that's so much fun. And she also, there's another story, at her wedding shower. How many of you guys have ever been to a wedding shower before? I know we just announced Pastor Amanda's. Okay, so at wedding showers, if you've not been there, they play ridiculous games. Okay, games that you're just like, where did you come up with this? And I don't know what's going on. My wife walks into her wedding shower, and there's this table. I'm walking outside of that. Well, let's just use this. There's a table, since there's a table here. And there's all these canned goods on the table. And she's like, okay, well, that's kind of weird. And they're like, well, this is actually your prize. She's like, well, okay, I guess. There's better prizes out there, but okay, canned beans is good. But, it's got like beans and corn and all these different things, all these things in a can. And they're like, okay, well, we're going to play a trivia game. We've asked Josiah some questions about himself in advance, and we're going to play this trivia game. And she's like, okay. So they start asking questions, and, they start off kind of easy, and she gets the questions. And all of a sudden, she gets one wrong. And she notices this woman stands up and walks over to the table. She picks up a can. She takes the label off and puts the can back down and goes and throws the label in the trash. So now you just have a can with no label sitting there. And she keeps going, and I would like to say that she got a lot of questions right. But I think the reality is there was more questions that were not right, because when she came home with her prize, we had a couple cans that we knew what they were, and we just had all these different cans that were just blank, just no label, and it was the most frustrating thing ever. Because we'd be sitting there, and it's like, it's not bad when you're like, hey, let's have chicken, and we need a side dish. Just grab one of the unmarked cans. And it's like, okay, well, what are we going to have tonight? Green beans. Great, that's awesome. But when you're making cornbread and you open up mandarin oranges, that's really annoying, because I don't think there's a mandarin orange bread. Maybe there is, but we don't have the recipe, and we really needed corn in that moment. And it was so frustrating to not know exactly what something was in that moment. And it was we tried to use up as much as we could, and when we left Bemidji, or when we left Minneapolis, is where we were living at the time, moved to Bemidji, we still had a few cans that didn't have labels, and to be honest, I think we ended up throwing them away, because we're just like, as bad as that is, we're like, we don't really know what to do with this, and you can't really even donate it, because they're going to be like, well, what is this? And it was just kind of a frustrating thing. I'm going to come back to that, but I want to talk about Jacob, and this will make sense. Follow me here. Jacob was an interesting guy. He started his life off a little bit rough. You see, Jacob was the younger brother as a twin. Do we have any twins in here today? Twins, triplets, anything? Nobody in this service? Okay. How many of you guys know someone that's a twin? Yeah, a few of you. Well, something I've noticed, we had triplets in our youth group in Bemidji, and we've had twins in our youth group here, and something I've noticed is this. Whichever one of the twins is the oldest will always remind everybody of that. It doesn't matter if it's an hour older or 10 seconds older. When they're introduced, they'll be like, I'm the oldest. Nice to meet you. You know, right away, they're just like, I'm the smart one. I'm the one that has life experience. They're just a baby. I got a whole 10 seconds on them. You know, they just don't even ask them questions, because I have all the answers. And so here's Jacob. He's starting off. He's the younger brother as a twin. And when they're born, if you remember the story, he's hanging on to Esau's heel. As Esau comes out, there's a little hand hanging onto his heel. And that's actually where they get the name Jacob from, because Jacob resembles the Hebrew word for heel. And back in the day, names carried so much importance, and names really had to do, they spoke a lot about you, and they said a lot of things, and they never just named a kid whatever they wanted. They were never just like, oh, Josiah, all right, perfect, there we go. Like, it always had meaning behind the name. And so he's named Jacob, which looks like the Hebrew word for heel. But in those days, there is a figure of speech where you could be called a heel grabber. And what that meant was that it carried a negative connotation, and it actually was kind of like a deceiver, a trickster, or someone that kind of just, wasn't quite on the level. Just kind of, they finagled their way through things. And so this is Jacob. He's being born, and 10 seconds into life, he's named Jacob, and that name is put on him and follows him. And every single day, he's reminded of that. He's reminded of this same idea that he was grabbing his brother's heel. He's reminded as a heel grabber. So think about your name. Think about how often do people use your name? How often do you hear your name throughout a day? And you start thinking about Jacob here, and you're like, man, that's got to be tough. Hey, deceiver, it's time for dinner. Come on in. Hey, trickster, have you fed the sheep? Every single day, his name, when it's used, just reinforced that same idea over and over of this label that had been placed on him constantly. This idea followed him into his life. And the interesting thing is he actually started to kind of live up to it. How many of you guys have maybe ever had something said about you, and maybe you even just kind of start to believe it, or maybe someone accuses you of something? I hear this one a lot. You're accused of something, and you're like, well, if you're going to accuse me of that, I might as well go and do it, because you already think I did. Like for a little kid, they're like, mom and dad are like, did you eat the last cookie? No, are you sure? I see crumbs on your face. And, but they're like, if you're going to accuse me of always eating the last cookie, I might as well just go and eat every last cookie there ever is, because you already think that's who I am. And Jacob started to live up to this name that was on him, deceiver. If you remember, his brother Esau comes in one time from hunting, and he's just incredibly hungry. And in that moment, he's like, Jacob's making food, and he's like, please, 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 give me some food. I am starving. I am so hungry. I think Esau was a little bit of a drama queen, because he's just like, I am going to die. Just give me some food. And he's like, I'll give it to you if you give me your birthright. And in that moment, Esau says words that probably haunted him forever. He's like, what good is a birthright if I'm not even alive to have it? And I don't think he actually was that close. Like, if you don't give me food in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to die. I think he was being a little dramatic in that moment, but he trades his birthright away. But it wasn't exactly this fair trade. You see, Jacob knew how to work the system. Jacob knew how to kind of pull a quick one on his brother. He knew how to push his buttons. And a little bit later, Esau is the oldest, again, is supposed to get a blessing from their father. And their father at this point is blind, and working with his mother, Jacob tricks his blind father into blessing him instead. And he just kind of keeps pulling stunts like this, where he's just kind of living up to his name. That name, that label that had been placed on him just became so real in his life. And where we saw him in Genesis 32, he's been running from his brother who was angry and wanted to kill him. He was running from a guy that he kind of worked for, and he just was always doing these things. He's just running from his past. But I think the reality is Jacob is really just running from himself. The entire time, he's just running from this person that he's become, this label that's been placed on him, and he's just trying to get away from that. And we see him at this moment, he's going back to his brother Esau. He wants to go back, and he's going to try and make amends with him. He wants to live in that land again. And we see him, and really in this passage of Scripture, he's up to his same old tricks, doing the same thing. He says, okay, well, you know what? My brother probably is really mad. He wants to kill me, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to send all of my family ahead of me. Really a great, great guy. My brother's really mad and wants blood. Let's send my family before me. But he's like, I'll send all my family in front of me. I'm going to send all of my livestock in front of me. I'm going to send all of my possessions, all of my worldly goods. And he actually went as far as he had written out this script that he wants every single person to say to his brother Esau when they get there. And they're like, oh, this is a gift from your servant Jacob, da-da-da-da-da. And he has this whole script written out for them that he wants them to say. And he's just, in all reality, just trying to save his own skin again. That's what he's doing here. He's just trying to escape the consequences of his life, the consequences of his decision that he has. And he's going through this, and we see this here. And he starts this wrestling match with this guy. It says God showed up, and they begin to wrestle. And he's wrestling all night long. Anybody in here, were you ever a wrestler in high school? Anybody? Yeah, we got a few. Okay. Wrestling matches are what, 3 minutes, right? There's a reason why they're 3 minutes. They are exhausting. At the end of 3 minutes, you are just done. You are spent. So here he is, starts a wrestling match late in the evening, wrestles all the way until the guy's like, the sun is about to come up. Just wrestling this entire time. He is putting everything that he has into this. And the guy even goes as far as, this is a little unfair in this wrestling match, but he's wrestling God, and God's like, okay, well, I'm going to use my God powers here and touch your hip, and okay, it's out of socket, there we go. And, wouldn't that be a great wrestling move if you could just, oh, your hip's out of socket. That's a bummer. I guess I'm probably going to win. But so he goes through this, and he keeps wrestling through that pain, keeps wrestling through everything, the exhaustion, just everything that's happening. He just keeps on wrestling. And then we get to this point where this guy kind of says, okay, what is your name? And that's a very, very important question that he says there. Because he's not actually asking what his name is. I mean, that's what it looks like. But the reality is he's not asking for a name. He's asking for a confession. See, God does this several times through Scripture. We see this even with Adam and Eve. They're in the garden, they eat the fruit, and they're hiding because now they realize that they're naked. And they're hiding, and God comes down into the garden, and what does he do? He asks them, where are you? Now, I'm pretty sure in a game of hide and go seek, God is going to be the best. All right, I don't think this was like God came down and is like, man, I've been looking for 10 minutes and I checked all the usual spots. They're not behind that tree. They're not in that bush. I just don't know where they are. They have the best hiding place ever. No, in this moment, God already knows where they are. He's asking for them to admit where they are. He's asking for a confession from Adam and Eve to actually say what they've done and what's going on. See, that's the same thing that's happening with Jacob here. He's not asking, hey, what's your name? Because wrestling etiquette means I should shake your hand and say, good wrestling match, Jacob. No, he's asking for a confession, not information. And in that moment, Jacob has to be able to admit who he is. He has to be able to admit who he's been, what his name is. And he says, Jacob. In that moment, he's like, man, I am a deceiver. That's who I am. He admits that in that moment. You see, Jacob had lived his entire life under that name. At this point, he's about 90-something years old. And he's having this wrestling match. He's lived for 90-some years under this label. You see, labels are incredibly great when we're talking about canned corn. But they're incredibly damaging when we're talking about people. Labels stick with you. Labels are something that constantly come back. When I was in second and third grade, I lost my 2 front teeth. And in that moment, I'm that dorky little kid that's missing their 2 front teeth, and it's just so cute as they try and say words and they can't say anything, you can't understand them. But then my adult teeth start to come in. We have a picture here of, my mom sent this to me. This is great. I think we have a picture here of me in second and third grade. And my mom has one of those things where they have all of the school pictures like in a circle, and then like your senior picture real big in the middle, which is just the worst. And when I go over to friends' houses that are now adults, if I go to their parents' house, the first thing I do is try and find old pictures of them that I can use as blackmail. And this is just forever, all of these pictures sitting there on my mom's wall. But so she sends me this, and you can see my picture in second grade. I've lost those teeth, and my adult teeth start to come in. And my adult teeth, like all, are significantly larger than my baby teeth. So you can see in that second grade picture, all you can see are my front teeth in that smile. Now, third grade, I got some of my adult teeth to kind of come in as well. But the reality is my 2 front teeth are larger than my other teeth by a good amount, and that's just even now as an adult. And I remember I got on the bus when I was younger, and I'm sitting near the back, and this older student comes and takes a seat next to me. And how many of you guys know that some kids, some adults, are very great at picking up on what you maybe are self-conscious of? They can see exactly what buttons to push. They know exactly how to make you, really how to hurt you. And this kid zeroes in on this right away. And he just starts saying stuff to me about my teeth, just kind of over and over. And in a moment of transparency with you guys this morning, to this day, when I get my picture taken, when I go to smile, those same words that he said flash through my head. How ridiculous is that? 20 years later, this still impacts me. But it's because words are powerful. Labels stick with you. No matter what you do, it's so hard to get rid of those. We always heard this when we were young, the idea of like sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. My favorite was, I'm rubber, you're glue, anything you says bounces off me and sticks to you. Right? Like that was just like the greatest comeback ever, used it all the time. Didn't really work because you just ended up getting punched. And they're like, yeah, did that bounce off? Yeah. So, but I liked that comeback as a kid. But the reality is we know better than that. Words hurt. Words carry weight. Words can create beautiful things, but words can also destroy. And Jacob's at this point in his life where he's like, man, I'm just sick of this. I am sick of this label, of this name that I've been living under. I'm sick of this life that I've been living this way. And I am willing to wrestle all night to get rid of this label. And he wasn't willing to do that before that. He lived 90-some years with this label on him, and he just lived up to it the entire time. But he finally reaches that point where he's like, okay, right now, right here, I am done. I'm sick of this. And I'm going to wrestle all night if it takes it. Because I need to get rid of this label. He wants to change his name. Name changes have a huge importance in their society, in our society, still to this day. I mean, when someone's married, lots of times the woman will take the man's last name. It shows this change of relationship in their life. When nuns and priests actually take their vows, they get a new name in that moment. Many times, if a child's being adopted into a family, they take the new name of that family, and it shows this time in their life where they have this massive change in their life. They're part of this new family. You know, it's no different in Scripture. We see Abram changed to Abraham and Sarai to Sarah, and that representing this new relationship that they have with God. We see Simon, who's also called Peter. Peter meaning the rock who I will build my church on. We see Saul, who's killing Christians. Saul the persecutor, who becomes Paul the apostle. And these name changes have huge importance. And in this moment, Jacob's like, I want my name change. I'm ready for it. I'm done with who I am. I want a new identity. Because he had heard so many different voices speaking into his life. He had heard his own voice. You know, and here's a great question. What voice is the strongest? Your voice, other people's voice, or God's voice? You see, normally I would answer God's voice is the strongest. But the reality is, the voice that's the strongest is the one you believe. You see, if you believe what others say about you, that is the strongest voice in your life. If you believe what you think and say about yourself, that is the strongest voice. It doesn't matter what God says about you if you believe something else. We need to believe what God says about us. Whatever voice is the strongest will give you your identity. And I know that this is something that we often see in kids and bullying and things like that, but the reality is it still happens as an adult. And the reality is there's a lot of adults that have never dealt with the things that happened when they were kids. And they've been labeled, and that's stuck with them. Drunk, addict, cheater, unemployed, unlovable, unwanted. These labels that we feel are deserving for ourselves or somehow we believe stick with us. You see, and labels aren't always necessarily a terrible thing. You know, when I've had all these different personality tests, maybe your employers have made you do that before. And, you know, in the DISC profile, I'm an ID. In Myers-Briggs, I'm ENFP. In Strength Finders, what am I? I had written that in here somewhere. You know, it doesn't really matter, but I'm a communicator, maximizer, adaptability, strategic, and something else. And in Dr. Smalley's, I'm an otter. I don't know what that means necessarily, but that's what I am. I'm an otter. You're either a lion, a beaver, an otter, or something else. And Those aren't necessarily bad, to know who you are, to know maybe like your personality type. Where the problem comes in is not knowing someone's personality, but when we allow that to define us and define how God can use us. You see, when we allow those labels to define what God can do through us, we're limiting what he can do. And we need to be willing to only allow the label that God has given us to define us. Because then there's no limit to how he can use us. Could you imagine if every follower of Christ truly knew their identity in him? That's all they looked for to define who they are. Could you imagine what God could do in this world? How he could use us? But too often we allow other things to become our identity. Maybe some mistake we made, maybe some decision we made, maybe something that happened to us all of a sudden becomes everything of who we are. As if somehow one decision can wipe away everything that God believes about you. And I think we need to be able to start that wrestling match and to say, you know what? God, here I am. When you ask my name, this is who I am. This is who I believe. This is what I believe about myself. This is what others say about me. This is what my reputation is. I'm placing myself in your hands because I only want to be defined by you. I only want my identity to come from you and from no one else. And I think there's a lot of adults that still carry things with them. Maybe it's something your spouse even says to you. Maybe your parents still say something, maybe siblings. And every time they say that, you just kind of cringe a little bit. And your blood just kind of starts to boil. Because you're carrying that baggage with you of what others are saying. And the truth is you can't control what other people are going to say. You know what, if you're like, I'm done, I'm going to start this wrestling match, I want a new identity, and I want that identity to be rooted in Jesus Christ. The reality is tomorrow when you walk into work, no one else had that moment that you had. Everyone else is still waiting for you with the exact same names and labels that they've always used. But your choice is what voice is the strongest. What voice are you going to listen to and believe? Because those voices aren't going to leave. They're still going to be there. But you have a choice whether or not you want to actually believe what it is that they're saying. We want to give you guys that opportunity to start that wrestling match. Maybe this is something that you need to wrestle with all day. Maybe all week. Maybe it's something that's going to take you a little while. We all are in different spots. We all have different baggage in our life. We all need to be able to wrestle with these things. We need to make that decision to actually start to do that. We need to make that decision where I'm going to maybe verbally even confess to God where I'm at, the things that I'm believing that I know I shouldn't. And we need to actually take that step and confess that, because sometimes in our life, there's something spiritual that needs to happen, but we aren't ready for it to happen. More often than not, God is waiting on us. We are not waiting on God. God's like, hey, I'm ready. Are you ready? I'm ready. You don't look ready. Are you sure you're ready? You don't look ready. I've had this in my life all the time. I'll walk in here, just like Pastor Mac was saying, I'll walk in here and I don't want to worship, and I've had a terrible week and I'm sick of it, and the last thing I want to do is stand up here and sing. But something weird happens. When I'm willing to go from doing this, come on, next song already, all right, are we done with this? I don't feel like doing this. When I change this, and all of a sudden I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go like this. You know what? I'm going to get down on my knees right here. I don't feel like it, but I'm going to do this right now. Because what I've seen in my life is so often before something can happen in the spiritual, something needs to happen in the physical. Because what I've seen is when I change the posture of my body, the posture of my heart almost always follows. See, there's nothing special about at the end of the service raising your hand when the person speaking asks some question. Nothing special about this. In and of itself, this doesn't mean a lot. Because if this goes up and this doesn't change, this means nothing. But what does make this special is sometimes before you're actually ready for something to change spiritually, God's just saying, hey, if you're not willing to even move physically, you're not willing to move spiritually. And for Jacob, he had to wrestle all night. That was his physical. I have to do this in the physical before I'm ready. You know, I think that when he started that wrestling match, he wasn't even ready for God to change him. He wasn't ready for something spiritual to happen. But through an entire night of wrestling, through that pain, that exhaustion, everything that was happening, he reached a point where not only had his physical posture changed, his spiritual posture had changed. And he was ready to just be broken and just say, God, here I am. This is who I am. This is what I believe about myself, and I don't want to anymore. I want you. And he reaches this place of brokenness. And I think today, there's people in this room that need to be willing to start something physical. They need to be willing to have a spiritual change in their life. In a little bit, we're just going to sing a song, and it's a short song. I don't know if anything can really maybe spiritually happen in your life in that time. Maybe it can. Maybe you're actually already ready for it to happen. But I encourage you to dwell on that a little bit. What are you believing about yourself that God is not speaking about you? What needs to be removed from your life? Do you feel worthless? Get rid of that. I think for some of us, maybe we're all right with where we're at, but we need to realize that our words have weight. It doesn't matter if that person laughed about the joke. That doesn't mean that it was funny and they were okay with it. You don't know what's going to stick with them for 10 years. You don't know what they maybe already are carrying with them, that your joke just loaded that on just a little bit more. And at some point, there's going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. I've seen kids try and move schools, towns. I've seen kids take their life because of what was said about them. Words matter. I was convicted a few years ago, and this is a personal conviction. I'm not saying this is for everybody, but God convicted me of my sense of humor, which was very sarcastic. And God told me, at its heart, sarcasm finds its humor at the expense of someone else. And there's no place in the body of Christ for that. And I was convicted in that moment, and I still struggle with that because it's just forever. That was my sense of humor. But I've had to realize that my words carry weight. And I think some of us, maybe we even need to go and apologize to somebody. Maybe it's something small and dumb, and they're going to be like, what? I don't even remember that. It doesn't matter. We need to realize our words carry weight.